and also to help boost your confidence in your role as a dietetic intern. I can't help but prepare learning objectives from my long history of teaching at the college level, and so here are your learning objectives. I hope after today's webinar that you will be able to describe at least 3 traits that preceptors seek when working with dietetic interns, and also to identify one aha moment, as I call it, from today's presentations. In other words, what is one new aspect of the dietetic internship that you hadn't considered before? So today's webinar, I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to myself. Today's webinar is one aspect of my career coaching consulting practice. My services are targeted towards nutrition professionals wherever they are on their journey. For example, I work with recent graduates, that would include you, who are now about to begin their dietetic internship. I also work with emerging professionals. So after completing your dietetic internship, going through the job application process and helping clients. Also, I work with professionals in transition, and I call these people professionals in transition because they are either entering the dietetics profession from another profession. For example, they may have been a school teacher and now they want to become a dietitian. Or it can also be mid-career nutrition professionals who want to change the sector of the practice that they're in. I also work with another group of professionals, and those who are hoping to, they've kind of finished their tenure, they think, with nutrition and dietetics, and they're ready to go on to a totally different career. So helping them as well. So specifically what I can do for you, I would encourage you, first of all, to visit my website, click on the current and recent students link, and you'll see a list of some of the services that I can provide. In Essex, I provide career coaching to help nutrition and dietetics professionals achieve your goals wherever you are on the path, because just about everybody seems to be on a different part of their journey. What I've decided to do this summer is to offer a 3-month package of, for lack of a better term, a support group, if you will, which would be every other week meeting with a small group of interns to offer tutoring and mentoring. The internship experience is very different for one student or intern to the next. And so what I will do during these support sessions, this discussion group that would happen every other week, is to focus on the needs of the group. We will have a topic to focus on as well. Interns can bring to the table experiences that they had, questions that they had, brush up a little bit on writing PES statements if that's what the need of the group is. So it'll be very fluid and organic depending on what the needs are of the interns who participate. And again, this is all in the spirit of boosting your confidence, because it's quite a transition to go from being a student to being an intern and preparing to practice on your own, or not necessarily on your own, but to practice as a dietitian, a credentialed dietitian. So if you're interested in that type of a group, please indicate so on the evaluation form that you'll receive tomorrow. So before we actually meet the preceptors face to face, I just want to introduce who they are and where they work, what their area of expertise is. Heather Danis is an MPH RD who works in public health. We have Amy Gendron, who's a clinical dietitian at one of the larger clinical facilities in the state. It's the University of Vermont Health Network at Central Vermont Medical Center. We also have James Leslie with us, who is in school nutrition with the Aurora Public Schools. I should have put in Colorado because everybody else is in Vermont. And then we have Nicole Riley. who's an MSRD working with the University of Vermont Dining Services in food service and systems management. And I want to assure you that the information that they will be sharing with you is relevant across the board. It is not just Vermont specific. Okay, and of course, James being in Colorado, his experience is a little bit different than those in here in Vermont. So, okay, let me get back to not sharing my screen. Okay, so now we're back. And why don't we start with you, Heather?
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Danis. I use she, her pronouns. And I was just doing the math. I've been a dietitian for 30 years. And I think one of the things I was reflecting on as I was listening to Amy speak is that none of us ever forget our own dietetic internship and our sort of launch into our career. So with sort of that framing of where I'm at right now is reflecting back on both my time as a dietetic intern and then in my career, I've been a preceptor to dietetic interns and other types of student interns for a good portion of my entire career. It was not long after I was precepted that I began precepting for mostly in the kind of higher ed government institution settings. I think that probably the three things I'm going to share are qualities that I lacked myself at the time, and looking back, wish that maybe somebody had told me some of these things. But I think for me, first and foremost, thinking about like coming to a rotation specifically, but approaching the internship experience overall, I think this applies, is just a high level of interest and engagement in what you're doing. You know, as preceptors, we are giving back to the profession that gave to us, and yes, we're for the most part doing this on our work time, but it's an additional job responsibility. We don't get paid anymore to precept. You know, we do it because we know that it's important. And so I think regardless of whether or not you know what you want to do in the field of dietetics, or you don't know what you want to do and how that kind of relates to the particular rotation that you might be experiencing, to sort of go into it with this thought that you're going to learn everything you can learn in that short period of time about that particular topic.
Okay.
And I think
you're gonna lock me out of my account, okay? With the email
person. Whoops. Okay, they muted.
Excuse me, is that newest person muted?
I think we're all set now. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. So just to sort of, I think for you to get the most out of it, and for your preceptor to get the best experience from precepting, is to just show up interested and engaged, regardless of whether or not you're going to end up in that particular part of the dietetics field. It is, in a sense, a once in a lifetime opportunity to be a student a little bit more before the pressure's really on you to perform at that professional level. So while it can feel like an additional hoop that you're jumping through, and maybe you're paying extra money beyond your 4-year or 6-year degree, depending on sort of where you're at in the process, to really be like fully absorbing that opportunity. And then the other two, really, I think they're all related. I think the next most important thing for me in working with an intern is the commitment to self-reflection. This really is about your learning experience, not about my learning experience. I will learn a lot as a preceptor that will help my own professional growth, but the students who I think get the most out of the rotation and set themselves up best for successful employment are those who are really engaging in self-reflection. How does this experience reflect on my thoughts about the profession, the field of dietetics, the work that I might be doing down the road in whatever professional setting that I'm in. And then again, related to this, I think the final piece for me is ownership of your own learning. This is to the point where it is a semi-professional role at this point. So you're not necessarily in that traditional student role, even though you might still be doing academic coursework to complete a master's. The applied practice experience is really that kind of on-the-job training. And so taking a high level of ownership of your own learning, the idea that it's not up to the preceptor to necessarily hold your hand through the experience. So really taking responsibility for your own learning, and that means maybe overcoming some of that hesitation to ask questions. But it's really that experience for you to absorb as much as you can during that time. And preceptors, we're here to provide you with that opportunity, but you really need to kind of step into that space and occupy that semi-professional role, which is a little bit different than even an undergraduate or a graduate student role. So I think that's about my time. I'll wrap it up all on the same theme, but I think the interest, engagement, self-reflection, and ownership of your own learning, to me, are the biggest things that I look for in a student who's going to be really successful in our rotation.
Great job, Heather. Perfect. 5 minutes. And I love your emphasis on the reflection, because I think that's really, it's overlooked sometimes. But honestly, once students get into, or interns, I think, get into the routine of reflecting, they can appreciate the value of stopping and thinking, well, okay, this happened, so what about it? And now what am I going to do with it? So thanks for bringing that in. And I appreciate your honesty from the get-go that you were thinking back to what you didn't have when you started an internship. Okay, Nicole, why don't we have you pick up?
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see some faces. My name is Nicole Riley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Sustainability and Campus Partnerships Manager with UVM Dining with Sodexo at the University of Vermont. So my role is really unique. It's actually, I kind of carved my own path. It wasn't really a position that existed prior to my journey as a dietitian. So I appreciated Amy's kind of perspective there, that you never stop learning. You continue to kind of find your way as you approach new challenges. And so I hope you kind of approach your internships in that way as well. In terms of traits that I find, I've been a dietitian for, I think 11 years. I've been in my position with the University of Vermont Dining for about 7. Prior to that was in inpatient and outpatient counseling. And so in food service, I think everybody's day is different in whatever profession you're in, but I think flexibility is one of the biggest things that I see in terms of traits that interns need to have. I do a lot to prep, the experience, which in our rotation is 6 weeks. It's a long rotation, and it has a substantial business plan associated with that, which takes up a lot of time and energy. And so while we might kind of approach, week 1, we're going to try to tackle these projects, things get thrown our way. There are challenges that come up that we don't experience necessarily anticipate. So really that flexibility and openness to just kind of pivot and transition based on the food service operation for that day, that week, and also just other things you kind of approach when you're looking at project management, which you can only anticipate so much about. I think I'll also just kind of jump off of Heather's point about really this is your time, your willingness to learn, be curious, ask questions. Not that you want to pepper your preceptor, with a million questions. We want you to be able to utilize your resources, but we also don't want you to travel too far off of the path and then come back a week or 2 later looking at a project and our expectations are not being met. So I think that communication and those quick questions, hey, quick check-in, make sure, hey, is this what you were expecting? We're not here to give you all the answers. That's part of the learning. So it's really about giving you some information, and then you're going to run off with that. And one thing I really try to do in my rotation with students is kind of get to know you a little bit, get to know what you're passionate about, and then kind of adjust that experience to what you are most interested in. Of course, there are certain things and assignments and tasks that need to be met, competencies, but we definitely can play with that a little bit to make sure that you're getting what you hope to get out of the experience as well. And then lastly, I would say, just because it kind of aligns with my journey as a professional, is, don't be afraid to try something new, to volunteer for something that's really outside of your comfort zone, because I think that's where we grow the most. So, kind of do some, again, self-reflection, what you hope to do, gain from the experience before the rotation, and then see, at the end of the rotation, if that met your expectations, push yourself to learn a little bit. If you're not really comfortable with public speaking, maybe you try to get a little bit more experience in meetings, or volunteer to do a presentation or something like that. But really use this time to kind of grow, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's where the learning really happens. So I don't know how I did with time, but I think I'll leave it there and happy to answer questions later.
Thanks, Nicole. Good timing. Time for a little bit more, but we'll just have more time for questions at the end. And thank you for reiterating the importance of being curious. I think that's a common theme. Heather alluded to that, you said that, and also flexibility. Students who had me as their program director know that I was always pushing them out of their comfort zone. And so that was a really important point to push as well. So thank you for that. Okay, let's see, James, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is James Leslie, and I work for Aurora Public Schools, like Amy said, in Colorado. So if you imagine Denver as the capital, we're just east of Denver, so kind of the big metro area. And before that, I was on the west side of Denver for Jefferson County Public Schools. So I'm happy to be here today talking about these traits as well. When Heather said no one forgets their internship, that's so true. Even just talking to some of the interns I have right now, we go, oh yeah, I remember when I did this. So it's fun to reflect on that. And it's an exciting 9 to 10 months you have ahead of you once you are placed in that internship. So I think the very first thing I have is, again, what's already been said, is be curious. I'll get that one out of the way since everyone keeps saying it, but there are so many nuanced aspects to every facet of dietetics that we're never going to cover all of it in the amount of time we have, right? So showing that you are interested in, maybe it's just this one part of it, in, let's say, food service is not really your jam, but you are interested in the sustainability piece. Maybe that's how you tailor your experience in that rotation. So just being curious, even if it's about one small thing about an area of the practice that you're not super interested in, I think goes a long way, because maybe you will find something down the road that sticks with you. And at least in my kind of world of child nutrition, school nutrition, I say be open-minded. I think a lot of people have in their head what nutrition and dietetics is. I think a lot of people have what school nutrition should be in their brains, but then when they actually come to our schools, they see that service in action. They see that we just can't make food magically appear on a student's tray, right? We have to plan it, we have to order it, we have to forecast it, and there's all these other layers on top of that. I think that's a big trait that I look for in interns as well, is that they're open-minded to the fact that what they're seeing does not necessarily mesh with what they think in their head, right? And taking that time to discuss with me, well, why is that the case? Coming back to that curious piece. Why is it this way? Can it be changed? Or is it just the way it is? And how do we work around that to serve our students? So I think that's a really big piece, at least from my world, that I would encourage you to kind of explore in your internship path as well. And then the final one for me is just be a self-starter. In the food service world, like Nicole was saying, we kind of have to shift every day to tailor what's going on that day. You might have one plan in your head, And then a school doesn't have gas and their kitchen is flooding. Okay, so how am I going to stop and feed those kids, right? And change that menu. So having somebody by your side or partnering with you in this internship who can do something with either a little bit of direction and aren't afraid to just go for it and try, I think is super important too. You're never going to know how well you do at something until you actually do it, right? So if it's something new, don't be afraid to try it. Go for it, get that rough draft out of the way, and then what do we do from there? We just revise, we proofread, and we try again. And that's all part of the process. So don't be afraid of that, especially with any sort of big project or getting up in front of people to speak, or that one-on-one patient interaction that you might be nervous about. Just go ahead and give it a try, because you can only get better from there, right? So those are kind of the big things that I would encourage interns to think about with any internship rotation, not just with school nutrition, but.
Thanks, James. I think you make a good point that so many of the traits that will work in one rotation will also be useful. They'll help you to succeed in another rotation, depending on the area of practice. And I heard you echoing a little bit of what Nicole was saying, that what seems to be somewhat unique to the food service management and school nutrition rotations is that it is very immediate. In public health, there's a lot of planning, and of course, there's disasters that can emerge out of the blue. And in clinical, you certainly have emergent situations that will arise. But I think the idea that you have all of these mouths to feed if there is an emergency really puts a unique spin on the nature of the food service management rotation. And the idea of being open-minded, like be ready to just jump in and push your limits so that you can grow, because I think it can't be said enough that mistakes are where we learn, and we all by habit don't want to fail. But when we do fail is when we really have leaps and bounds in our professional growth as well as our personal growth. So thank you for your comments. Okay, Amy Gendron from the clinical world.
Yeah, hi, I'm Amy Gendron. I'm the clinical nutrition manager at Central Vermont Medical Center, which is part of the University of Vermont Health Network. I do floor duty 2 to 3 days a week as well. So I do precept the students when we have them. I am seeing patients quite often myself. As I'm one of the later presenters, I really share most of everything our other preceptors have said. Maybe I'll have a little bit different of spin on it, but and I talked with my other coworkers too. There's a few of us here, and we definitely had some common themes. So one being somebody who demonstrates their confidence, be ready, ready to go talk to patients. You might be nervous. It's okay to say you're nervous, but go for it, and know that we'll be there to pick things up if they start falling apart, but be ready and have that confidence to go in for it. That being said, being somebody who can accept the constructive criticism for the work that you're doing and making progress. And we like it when you ask for that feedback as well. So that, just really shows that you're there to learn and to grow. Know that we don't have all the answers all the time. So we definitely, as everybody said, ask questions, show your interest, do your research first if you can, but know sometimes we don't have all the answers as well. So appreciating that we're kind of there to learn alongside with you sometimes. I think it was Nicole who started with saying the flexibility. It might be in part the small hospital relative maybe to some other states where I'm at, but a lot comes up here as well, if there's a disaster, you might get thrown into some of the food service things. You know, feeding the patients is always going to be the first priority when you're in a hospital, whether you're a clinical dietitian or food service dietitian. Know that you might end up working with multiple preceptors at a site, depending on scheduling, sickness. So having the flexibility to shift from one preceptor to another. Your hours might vary depending on the hours that dietitian is working and what you'll be seeing in a day for patients. You might think the day you're going to start the day seeing, you know, ABC patient, but really it ends up being X, Y, and Z because of consults that come in or somebody wasn't available. So being able to shift from one thing to another fairly quickly and having, you know, that open mindset, and also know you're going to be interrupted in what you're doing. You might be full steam ahead, you know, all this planned out, what you want to go ask a patient, what you want to say to them, but you can be in there for 5 seconds and the attending comes in and generally they have priority, the doctor. So, so things might, you know, you just have to reset and come up with a plan B for what you're going to be doing. We want to get to know you and your interests. So be your true self. You know, we don't want every intern to be the same or the same, you know, just be who you are, show your personality. I think that's how you're going to get the most out of it as well. If you're being true to yourself. Have some thought, you know, the self-reflection maybe it is, or what you want to get out of it as well. Often we're able to give the students a choice in the patients they want to see in a day, you know, or the disease states that they want to be part of the care in the day. So be thinking ahead of what your interests are. If you have particular interests in things you want to learn more about or experience, but also know, you know, you might not always have that choice depending on the preceptor or the day. Maybe this goes back a little bit to flexibility, but you know, you might be seeing things that really you don't want to see, or but it's part of being there. For example, some interns or students are thrown off and a little nervous about seeing open wounds, or, you know, really doing that nutrition focused physical exam, touching people, but be open to it. That's part of the patient care. So, you know, you might come out with a different mindset than what you went into about taking care of patients who have real complex needs like that. So I think that covers most everything I wanted to mention, Amy, but I also look forward to the questions when they come.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And also I appreciate you brought in the idea of constructive feedback and how helpful it is when the interns say from the get-go, I'm really looking for both positive and constructive. I don't want to say negative feedback, but you know, I'm just dancing with words here. But the value of getting both types of feedback, and that's an art in and of itself, how to receive that feedback. Also, too, your comments about being confident, having the confidence to go into a patient's room, even if it might be the first time. We used to say in the MSD program, fake it until you make it, you know, and not to blatantly abuse that statement, but you do have to kind of muster up the courage, because the first time you do anything like that, for example, going into a patient room, or maybe in in some type of management position, having to, you know, evaluate an employee, if that's what one of your rotation assignments is, that it does push you out of your comfort zone, and to try and just take a deep breath. And as one of our preceptors has said, at least one of them, you know, this is your time to experiment, be pushed out of your comfort zone, dare to take a risk, because it's a supervised practice experience. That's the whole idea, is that there is a watchful eye, a practiced watchful eye that has your back in the event that things don't go as you had expected. So thank you to all the preceptors for sharing sort of big picture, really important issues and traits. I should say that they are the traits. A couple of the questions that came in before today's webinar had more to do with the nuts and bolts of the internship. And so perhaps I'll just pitch those to you and you can answer them. But I'd also like to have more of a general discussion. There have been a couple of questions posed before the webinar that I think really have some the potential to get some discussion going. But one of the questions that had come up was something about like, what can you expect as an intern for space? Like, that's perfectly normal. Can interns expect to have like their own desk, their own room? What does that look like? And I wonder if any one of you preceptors could just speak to how that question might be answered. Feel free to just jump in.
I'll jump in. I think it's going to be highly variable across your rotations. You'll have something everywhere you go, but what that looks like might be different. And I think not just about the physical space, but access to the systems that particular organization uses. You're not an employee, so there are that will probably be variable, whether or not you have access to like internal folders or other kind of communication mechanisms or software or whatever it might be. So I think about that both just in terms of the physical space, but the electronic space, because so much of our work is done electronically these days. But I think that preceptors are always thoughtful about, thinking through what the students' needs are going to be and doing their best to accommodate those needs, knowing that sometimes these organizations don't have a lot of resources or a lot of extra space. So, and some of our rotations, we now still, even post-pandemic, do some stuff remotely. So it's not necessarily always everything on site now.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I see there's a question in the chat box. How can someone best set themselves up for success in their working relationship with a new preceptor? I think this is a great question. Should we be asking about expectations in the first meeting? Who'd like to answer that question?
I can kind of tee that up if that's helpful. So one of the things that I try to do is a really robust onboarding orientation on day one, which starts with like a get to know you meeting where we're really going to go through all the competencies, the expected task kind of, and really outlining, even before the rotation, I suppose, where you're going to park, dress code, safety issues, like all of that housekeeping stuff. Ideally, I think the UVM program is great. It's like a week in advance. That's a good timeline for preceptors to kind of, have that information for you. You don't forget it before the first day. But really, that first meeting is what I give that opportunity. It's like an hour and a half where we're really going through things thoroughly and also just getting to know you as a person and your interests and some of that pre-reflection work. Like, what do you hope to get out of this? That kind of stuff.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to the expectations point. That's a big focus in my job just normally, is like, how can you expect someone to do something when you aren't setting those expectations or to hold them to it? So that's one thing I do with all my interns as well, as I go, here's what you can expect from me on a day-to-day basis. And here's what I expect from you, whether that's you're keeping track of your own hours or you're coming to me with questions, or if I assign you to be somewhere at some time on some day, you're doing your own follow-up to find out where it is or contact the person that you're going to meet there, assuming I make that connection for you, but you're kind of doing the follow-up work on your end. So those kinds of things I like Nicole said, I just get that over with on day one. And then kind of as projects evolve and things like that, those expectations might change, right? We might have to reevaluate every week or so that you're here. So just keep that in mind too, that if you're ever unsure, it's better to ask than to just not know and not do it correctly or not meet those expectations and then possibly have to do something again. So I try to make that very clear from the get-go as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I would like to add that I believe most preceptors have the intention of providing that type of overview on the first day. And if somehow it gets pushed to the side because of some unforeseen situation that requires immediate attention, be sure to ask, the very next day, when can you, the intern, expect to have that conversation with the preceptor? What I have experienced over the years with students and interns is that sometimes they feel like, well, they don't want to burden the preceptor with these kind of questions because they feel like it's not important in the big scheme of things. However, having a solid foundation to move forward is about the most important first step that you can take when you begin a rotation. I'd like to pose a question to each one of you as the preceptor, and it's the question was asked in the context of, what have you seen interns struggling with the most during your rotation? So for Amy, for example, what have you seen interns struggling the most with their clinical rotations? And then the other preceptors, I'll be following up with you with the same question.
I'm not sure if it's the most that I'm answering, but something that has happened a few times and it really kind of pulls people back, or I've realized there's a problem going on is, you might see somebody earlier in the day and be working on the documentation later in the day. Make sure you're staying current with what's happening with that patient. There's been a few times, you might have somebody starting off on a tube feeding in the morning, but by the end of the day, they are no longer on the ventilator, no longer getting a tube feeding. And it just kind of seems silly to be putting that note in, when that's all said and done. So stay current with what you're doing in the day. Things change very quickly sometimes in the clinical world. Sometimes seems like things take forever. But so for clinical, it's about staying current with what's going on with the patient if you have responsibility in their care.
Okay, thanks. Who else would like to chime in? Because I think it's a good question to ask for each area of practice. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
This is a hard one. I feel like every intern is very different and they all bring their own strengths and opportunities. But I think one of the things that we've kind of said it a few times, and I think the reason why I don't necessarily want to say it again, I don't want to harp on it too much, but really like checking in and staying on task with bigger projects and things so you're not falling behind. And sometimes I think interns have this very like perfectionist type A kind of mentality that they like want it to be perfect before they show the preceptor. And for big project work, that's really not always going to be possible. So you're going to have to, put something forward, put a draft together that, is maybe not your best work. It doesn't have to be a perfect outline that is like perfectly formatted. It just needs, to have the nuts and bolts down, because sometimes we run out of time if you like get so hung up on it being perfect before you get to those end stages. And if things change, you've spent all this time like creating a business plan and that station or that concept is not actually happening. And so just being open to that and kind of staying on task, I think is one thing for the food service business plan that is a majority of the experience that I spend time with students on. So.
Okay, thank you. Heather, what are your thoughts about that question?
I think specific to community nutrition and public health, because it's usually a short rotation in work that takes sometimes decades to accomplish. Right?
Yes.
When we're looking at, the sort of big population level stuff. You're really getting kind of a taste and a snapshot. And I think some of the concepts may be a little bit different than the kind of individual clinical focus that's often comes through really strongly in the coursework associated with your degree. So I think that I think sort of just like showing up as your true self. I feel like we can see it a mile away if you're either checked out or trying to sort of pretend like you know what's going on when you're really struggling. So like if you're lost, just say you're lost. And it's okay to be like, I know I want to do this and it has nothing to do, like if you want to do food service management and you never want to touch public health, like it's totally okay to express that, because sometimes that release of being able to kind of like be honest about who you are really lets you enjoy the rotation. Because you can want to focus on a different area of dietetics, but still do these rotations that aren't necessarily connected to that and get a lot out of them when you're sort of not so worried about whether or not this is in line with what you want to do when you finish your internship. So I think sometimes students can get a little bit too caught up in whether or not this particular rotation fits with their career objectives. And it gets in the way of the rotation, and it gets in the way of the relationship with the preceptor, because the preceptor has gone into that particular job most likely because they really love that area of the profession. I think just that piece of just sort of showing up with your true self, but in a professional way, so that it's not off-putting, as I think that's that kind of disinterested, disengaged, or not really feeling lost, but not being honest about feeling lost, or the things that just make it as a preceptor really hard to engage with a student.
Really good points. Yeah. Okay, James, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, in kind of the more food service areas of dietetics, I think a lot of interns I get also forget that at the end of the day, we handle food and we read recipes and we kind of do these very basic things that a lot of people do day to day. But I think, at least I remember when I was in the internship too, you kind of live up here, right? You're thinking big ideas, you're talking a lot about abstract things that it's hard to put into a tangible thing or a process or something like that. But in the food service world, it's very real. It's like you take this recipe and you're making this dish that then gets served to somebody, and it's a physical thing and they eat it. So I think it's important for interns to remember too that a lot of what you're going to do, yes, is abstract and kind of thinking work, but a lot of it also is going to be tangible, and there needs to be a product at the end of that as well. So just keeping that in mind, that I feel like a lot of interns try to overthink what they're doing too. And it's like, this is a recipe. You use these all the time. Like, don't overthink it. Just get something down on paper. And if you're missing something, that's my job to let you know that it's not there. So just keeping that in mind, I think, at least from my perspective, is always a good thing.
Great, thank you. We have time for probably another round of answers here. One question that I'll pose that each one of you can answer. What communication methods have been successful with interns as in your role as a preceptor? James, do you want to start with that question?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way for me is email. Yes, I get a lot of them, but it's the one way I can keep track of everything and go back. And if you start the process of setting up an internship with me 6 months out, you better believe I'm going to forget in 3 months that we had that conversation. So it's nice to have things written down and for me to go back to. Yes, a phone call is good too, because sometimes we got to talk through some more detail heavy things, or it's hard to just type all that out. So I think a combination of those is good. I did have one distance intern set up a call, like a video call as well. Now that we have several tools to do that, it was nice too. That way I just get eyes on someone to know, okay, this is what they look like. I'm waiting at the front door to let them in. I'm not going, is this them? Is this them? You know what I mean? So it's just like easy things like that.
Okay.
But yeah, and like Nicole said, having an onboarding process too, that every intern goes through the same thing. That way I'm not repeating things all the time as well. So I try to do that as much as possible too.
Okay, great. How about you, Amy? What's your best communication method with interns?
I think similar to James, I mean, at least before the rotation starts and actually being on site, email works the best. The paper trail in that regard, the electronic paper trail is nice. But also don't hesitate to reach out if you're not hearing back from me, or if it's, I might have lost track of it, or, so just don't hesitate to send reminders, or, did you forget about me, or what do you, asking the questions about what you need to do next to be ready for your internship. And then, once you're in the facility, it's pretty much, face-to-face conversations, most of all. At least we do mostly general clinical rotation where I am anyway. So it's mostly people's first experience in clinical and not so much the specialty rotation. So you're spending a lot of time with the preceptor. You're not really out on your own too much, although I do find, and I wasn't around when I was an intern 20 plus years ago, that, some text messaging throughout the day, if we are separated, is a nice way to communicate. It's not usually through our cell phones. It's more through, whether it's something like Microsoft Teams or something on the hospital's computer program. You can also do HIPAA compliant messaging usually as well. So that's, I think, a real nice feature that that students these days might have access to be able to talk through patient information without having to be in the same room as the preceptor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Heather?
Yeah, I think leading up to the rotation email, ditto for that. I just want to put a plug in for really taking any opportunity you can to develop and hone your writing skills, because as someone who hires dietitians and other types of staff, that is one of the underdeveloped areas often that we are seeing in students who are coming out of variety of programs. So, knowing how to write like a professional email is a skill in today's workforce. It's different than the kind of email that you would write to a, in a social setting. So, and then we have daily sort of contact with face-to-face or over Teams with interns once they're on site. So that's more, I think, frequent, and it's nice to have that, to be able to have that face-to-face connection sort of during the actual rotation.
Yeah, thank you. I think that one of the sources of anxiety for interns can sometimes be, when will I have a chance to chat with the preceptor? So hearing that it's kind of built into all of your rotations, I think, is very helpful. And for interns who find themselves in a rotation where it's not part of the rotation that you see the preceptor every day face to face, the beauty of Teams and Zoom is that you can have a face-to-face, but again, you would need to raise the question in order to have that scheduled.
Can I just add one more thing, Amy? I think
yeah.
we've all probably had the rotation where we kind of got stuck in a corner and ignored for a week and didn't know what we were doing. And just like that happens, not every preceptor is going to knock it out of the park, just like not every intern knocks every rotation out of the park. So I think part of what you'll learn as you're going through these rotations, because a large majority of you might end up precepting one day, is you learn from your own experience what worked well. If you have a horror story in your mind of like a rotation that really didn't work well for you, then when you are going to become a preceptor that you're going to do things a little bit different so that the students that you're precepting can have a positive experience instead of a negative experience. But I also think negative experiences kind of are a part of the process. I think that to some degree that's unavoidable also.
Yeah, and thanks for that perspective. I remember helping students to process those experiences that were negative and to put it in the context of just saying, this is a good example of how you won't practice then, take away from that. So it's basically reiterating what you were saying. Okay, Nicole, we have just a couple minutes left and then we'll wrap up. But what are your thoughts about communication?
Yeah, I think similar to everybody, email, Teams, those are kind of preferred methods. But I would also just say, like, at the get-go, like, have that be part of your expectations. I mean, I have a new coworker that just started, she's peppering me with like a million, like, one-line emails. I'm like, this isn't working for me. Let's grab like a few minutes and go through everything, or, put it all in one email and we can go through it. Then I can go through it all at one time. So just as part of the expectations, like, what is your method of communication? Is it, a check-in every morning for, 10 minutes to give you projects? Is it, at the end of every week, check in how you did for the week and set expectations for the following week? But I think that's, communication is so important in the professional work setting. And so just making sure that you're, on the same page. And sometimes you do have multiple preceptors. You might be working with, in my rotation, I may have 6 different contacts for the student because we all have different areas of expertise. So you might have to shift that, and that's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, in the last few minutes, I just want to go back to screen sharing before we all hang up. So bear with me while I shift gears here. Shift gears, yeah. Let me get this back up into, okay. So to conclude, thank you very much for your participation today, all of you soon-to-be interns, and a very big thanks to the preceptors for taking time out of their busy days. I think the understated fact about preceptors is that they do all of this volunteering. So probably some people have already gone home from work and they are doing this on their off time. So I really appreciate the time that each one of you preceptors took out of your busy days and evenings to help out with this, this topic. And I'm hoping that as a result of participating in today's webinar, that you have had some of your anxieties or uncertainties diffused. If you still have more questions, feel free to reach out to me either via my website or my email. The email is on the screen there. The slides, as few as they are, will be available after the webinar. And please, with a big emphasis on please, complete the evaluation form tomorrow. When you have the opportunity as a professional to plan a meeting, and we all want to know, well, what could have gone differently, and get some ideas for the next time you hold a meeting or a conference, you start to really appreciate the value of meaningful feedback. So please take the time to complete the evaluation form. The link to the form will be sent through Eventbrite, and you should get that after 8 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow. Again, the recording of the webinar will be posted on my website. It will be on the resources tab. And thank you. Best of luck with your dietetic internship.